70s, and he opposed it up until his death. Now, Corbyn himself, however, was interlinked with a group or a tendency that argued since about 2004-5 for what they call was another Europe is possible. That argument was adopted within the left of the Labour movement over a number of years, whereby they thought that by making alliances with other left-wing groups in Europe, they might be able to forge an alliance that could create an alternative paradigm for the European Union.
Content over everything!
Now, and therefore that was the sphere, well, a new Europe. It doesn't have to be a European Union.
Europe didn't work.
Sorry?
Europe hasn't worked.
But this was the argument they made. You asked me about what he thought. I'm discussing what his arguments were and where they came from. I'm not taking a stance on that per se. I'm merely saying where he came from, where that came from.
Do you think if we don't need the common market, which is unlikely, we're more likely to have a new Prime Minister with the Tories still being in power in a couple of weeks' time?
I mean, as I was trying to explain, I'm trying to avoid going into the same discussions that you hear every night on television, on the radio,
I haven't got a TV.
And so on.
Don't blame me.
Okay, not you, but all the rest of you. All right, the internet. You've been listening to the internet too much. Now, the reason being is that it's a circular discussion, and everyone then becomes a prophet. You know, will Rees-Mogg become Prime Minister? Will Boris Johnson do that? Will Chuka Umahr leave the Labour Party? Will Jeremy Corbyn be removed? You know, these discussions are the type of discussion that Laura Kuenssberg and Jon Snow want you to think are the only discussions going on in the world and the only issues that matter in the world. To be fair to Jeremy Corbyn, in spite of difficult circumstances, he's tried to maintain the focus on the social issues in society. He's tried. But the cacophony of noise has been so loud, leave, remain, that it's almost been impossible to hear the arguments that Corbyn's been making about the social conditions in the nation. Because if you want to create a different Europe or a different world, you have to create a different scenario inside your country to explain the foundations of a different type of world that you would like to see, and to create an element of that or elements of that within the society you live in. The reason why the Tories, you see them, it's like a strange pantomime. They go into Parliament, they vote against the government, and then the next minute, when they've lost their majority one time after another, any confidence vote, they'll all support the Tories. Right? Why did they do it? In all previous circumstances, governments would have fallen. But in this circumstance, there's one unique characteristic to our times, and that is the simple fact that Jeremy Corbyn is leader of the Labour Party. And the one thing that unites the Tories and the DUP, and unfortunately a section of the Labour Party, of the Parliamentary Labour Party, is they do not want to see Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. That's the number one issue. And occasionally they publish it in the newspapers. You'll have something like the Financial Times publish an article. They said, far worse than Brexit, any impact of Brexit would be a Jeremy Corbyn government. That's the real attitude of the ruling classes in Britain. And so that lies behind the entire structure of the political debate at the moment, is the number one issue for the British ruling class and their political acolytes is we must stop Corbyn. That's it. And the reason why that is, and why it's so virulent, is because, I'll take you 1 second, is because don't forget the last election. What was it? What was it? 2016, wasn't it? 2017, sorry. 2017, so a year and 9 months ago. In May that year, Theresa May called an election. There were local government elections just after she called the election. There was an 8-week period. And as soon as the local government elections gave Labour 28%. That was the actual vote. And everybody said, Labour's campaign is doomed. I actually watched a YouTube video from the time. They said, Labour is doomed. Jeremy Corbyn's getting the cropper. He's destroyed. 8 weeks later from 28% to 40%. A 12% shift towards Labour in 8 weeks. Now that is the reason why she won't call a general election. One moment she actually looked quite strong. I thought to myself, why doesn't she call one? You know, when she lost the vote, or better said, she lost the vote, then there was a Tory party no confidence vote. Then she won that. Then she came back with she went to the public appealing to them, saying, this deal is the only deal. And for a moment, the British public swung behind her. They thought, well, let's just get it over with. She's got a deal, agree it. And then everyone's blaming Jeremy Corbyn or the Liberals or the Tory right wing or the Tory Remainers. But the real reason is just this. The only thing that she knows and her strategists know, and the Financial Times published a few weeks ago, they said, the one place where Jeremy Corbyn feels in his element is going out to the masses. That's what he's done his whole political life. I've been on demonstrations of 5 people with Jeremy Corbyn. And he will keep campaigning. And that's what he knows how to do. And that type of statement is exactly why he would win an election. Because people will say, I don't agree with him on this, I don't agree with him on that, I don't agree, but he's too honest. So I'm going to put my ballot vote for him. My friend, you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised.
I wish him the best, but you know and I know everybody knows politics is a dead.
On the contrary, what I agree with you on that is what you said, politics is a dirty game. And he's been surrounded by enemies attacking him ever since he got elected. Inside the Labour Party. And he has had to compromise in ways that I don't agree with. In ways that I don't, and I've fought alongside him for 30 years. But I agree. He's had to compromise on some issues he should not have done. But people know that. They know that. And so once he gets a chance to campaign, and I was involved in election campaign 2017, there were people at central office of the Labour Party sabotaging the campaign. For example, and they repeat these things, but then the journalists never complain about them. They just go on about, they just mention them. For example, some people in the headquarters of the Labour Party were making programmes, right? Facebook posts for the Labour Party campaign. And what they did was, because they were being told to try and sabotage Corbyn, this is Labour Party staffers, right? They were told, the way to do it is this. Send the message, the advert, only to the inner team of Corbyn. So they will see the advert thinking it's gone out to everybody. But actually, it's only gone to like 150 people around Jeremy Corbyn. That's how they actually operate, these people. And so, when this, I can't remember the name of this burger, I believe it is, screaming and shouting about she's attacked because she's Jewish. Actually, the head of the Labour Party, where she's her constituency, who are moving the resolution to remove her, is Jewish as well. But they don't mention this because it suits their interest to smear Corbyn. That's the game. Smear, terrorist. He's working for the Czech Secret Services. So they say. That actually wasn't her. Well, I mean, Koonsberg also had protection Labour Party conference. These people have a hysteria. I mean, that guy James Goddard, right? For all how disgusting he is. Hang on, James. I don't know. I don't want to be. I'm me.
Being nasty to you because you are a Jew.
I'm not a Jew. I'm German. I'm German Chinese.
You don't know.
Sorry?
That's Cantonese.
What's the Cantonese word?
It is Mandarin.
Ni hao ma.
Ni hao ma.
Ni hao ma.
Ni hao ma.
How like an Indian,
Yeah.
and ma like your mother.
Right, yeah.
Ni hao ma, remember that? Ni hao ma, mother. That's how do you do in Chinese. How are you?
Right.
It's a greeting.
Heiko, is the left and right polarizations in Europe and the world?
Who's smoking skunk?
Is it
It's knocking me out.
Is it,
Do it that way.
Is
At this time of day, I can't have that smell.
this
It knocked me out and I'll start behaving.
Heiko, is this left and right polarization now? Is it an emotional or intellectual rebellion against technology?
It's you, Ralph, isn't it? No wonder you go on all those esoteric trips.
Is it an emotional or cerebral?
It's a bit early for that. It's a bit early for drinking, a bit early for skunk, in my opinion.
Is it an emotional, intellectual rebellion against globalisation and technology? The left and right polarisation. Is this a rebellion? I think is it emotional?
Here, speak up.
Is it emotional or intellectual?
It's what?
I think the polarisation of left and right.
Is it emotional? I mean, how do you divide it? Emotion, intellect, human beings are composed of both. You're never going to make a revolution by just winning people over on logic. You know, it's not a mathematical formula. It's a combination of emotion and logic. Human beings, after all,
are emotional.
Come from, we discussed this a few weeks ago, if I remember rightly, and now because of modern technology, I try not to cover exactly the same subject every time, because otherwise the audience are going to go, he said that last week. That's the nature of the game now, you've got to be on your toes, which puts me in a lot of difficulty, because I've got to go home, I've got to sit there. Once I've spoken at Speaker's Corner, I've got to look through. One is to think about what I said, then check if when people ask questions and make contributions, if they were right or I was right, or if I just fired from the hip and talked a load of shit. And then I have to post retractions or explanations to qualify what I've said. It's a complicated game we live in now. So the question is this. Human beings emerged out of unconsciousness. Yeah, I agree with Darwin that we came from other species. This week I looked into, because we were discussing this last week, human origins, and there are people like Ralph over there who have this type of position that man is a beast, and males amongst man, in other words humankind, are more beastly than women, and that man's aggression, man's violence, man's seeking after possessing is something innate to the male sex and also innate to the human being. And that comes from some ancient, primordial source of human existence, or of hominid existence, or of apes. So then this week I started looking, and I recommend you do the same. I started looking up our ancestors, the origin of man. And basically, modern science has investigated the lives of chimpanzees and the lives of the other closest ancestor to human beings, which is an ape called the bonobo. Anybody heard of them, the bonobo?
Have a lot of sex.
It's like a pygmy chimpanzee. They live in slightly different areas of Africa, and they both are the genetically closest creatures to human beings. Chimpanzees will have violence as the mechanism of control, as a general phenomenon. They will use violence. The strongest ape, the alpha male ape, will use violence as a general method of controlling the rest. And they will have sex with all the females. The females will have sex with all of them, so that the male doesn't eat the child. And they can have sex several times a day.
They will have sex with the children.
They are very promiscuous and very macho, like some of the macho guys around Speaker's Corner who talk that sort of language. They seem to think that bunk it 12 times a day, like that. The problem with the chimpanzees is when they have sex, or better said, when the male generally rapes the female, it only lasts about 5 seconds. So they have sex 7, 8 times, 5, 6 times a day, but it only lasts 5, 6 seconds. The bonobos, in contrast to the chimpanzee, is female dominated. And the females, when there's an aggressive, violent clash that might break out, the females control the males with sex. Not only do the females control the males with sex, and they have sex for a long time, and they also have sex facing each other, like human beings do. But not only that, they also have homosexual sex, they have lesbian sex, they have sex all the time. And the fact of the matter is, they don't have any war, they don't have excessive violence, and there is no killing and no infanticide. So I would suggest there's also studies been done which shows that the hip structure of the bonobo ape is far closer to the human being than the hip structure of a chimpanzee. And it's the leading expert on bonobos in the world. He made a study and postulated that there was it's known that there was an ecological disaster in Zaire, or in the area of Zaire, Lake Congo, around 2 million years ago. And at that time, the vegetation, the jungle vegetation declined. And so these creatures were forced to go onto the plains. They collected from the plains their sustenance. And so it's a fair possibility that our closest ancestor, and that we are derived from this female-dominated, sexually enjoying species of ape that still exists today, called the bonobo. There's a study carried out in Dallas, a 20-year study, whereby they've studied the bonobos in their interaction with human beings. And they've investigated what the bonobos can learn. And if you compare what a bonobo can learn with what a chimpanzee can learn, you discover a radically different set of learning capacities. The bonobo, for example, the first tool that fundamentally distinguishes human hominids, or our ancestors in the Homo species, hominids are the first creatures to be able to use flints, to shape the flint by cracking one rock against another, making it into what was called the Oldovian rock, a flint, or the Oldovian hand axe. You can see them in the British Museum or in the Museum of London. And these tools are what distinguished all other species from hominids. It's what made us human, that we could control nature by controlling tools, by using tools. And so for 2 million years we had these tools. But what was interesting in the study in, I believe it's Dallas, is that they found that if you show a bonobo how to make a hand axe or how to strike a flint, to make sharp-edged tools, and then how to use it to cut something, like the skin of an animal, the bonobo will learn it. Now they will learn it. And that again is a very strong indicator that the bonobo is our ancestor, not the chimpanzee. Or if it is a chimpanzee, it's a combination between the bonobo and the chimpanzee. The reason why I raised this last week was because Frederick Engels and Marx, back in the 1860s, had argued that the history of humanity probably went through this process of ape coming down from the trees, of foraging around and requiring an upright posture. The upright posture frees the larynx to allow the vocal box to develop. And because of tool making and exploiting nature in a more sophisticated fashion, we required and drew forth language. So the upright position frees the vocal cords. The tools enable you to deal with the external environment, lions, tigers, and so on, predators that can attack you. And by collectivity, we're able to overcome the physical weaknesses of the human body. So, for example, if an animal is scavenging from a buffalo that dies, human beings would eat from that buffalo. Or our ancestors, hominids, would eat from that buffalo. But in doing so, one is, we could not store a buffalo meat. Therefore, we had to eat it there and then. Therefore, there was no reason for our ancestors to hoard it for themselves any more than when you go to a, £10 Chinese buffet dinner. No point in you piling up piles of food that big, because you can go back and forth, and when you're full, you're full. You can't eat anymore. And therefore the limits were created by natural environment, and the collectivity emerged out of necessity. So primitive communist theory that Marx and Engels had, based on the idea that humanity was collectivist and that human society was probably dominated by females, probably has a lot of relevance. The only qualification to that I would make is the following. The studies of bonobos and chimps showed that it was the external environmental condition that created the circumstances whereby males or females played a predominant role. And therefore, if hunting became more significant, the male could well have gained a dominant position. But then in another environment or another ecological condition, hunting might become less significant, and therefore the female role might rise up again. And therefore I think there was probably some balancing out over history, which allowed males and females in the primordial state, in a primitive state, to balance and shift between which was dominant and which was subordinate. But certainly it is true that there are at least 10 or 15 types of community, human community today, that are still female dominated. And there is no evidence in modern time of any male dominated society reverting to female dominance. And therefore it's almost certain that for long periods of history, of the majority of perhaps modern history, I'd say modern history, the history of the last 50,000 years, that females probably played a dominant role in much of human history. That period of history, 50,000 years or so. And certainly with agriculture, because with the emergence of agriculture about 20,000 years ago, human beings, the females provided a staple. They grew the crops. The males went and hunted. And so they provided the staple means of existence. And also, because they mixed together, they didn't know, they weren't taught by Jamie Oliver how to cook. And therefore, because they mixed together the crops, barley, wheat, corn, they also discovered alcohol as a mechanism of controlling the males when they became too aggressive. And that continues to this day, as we know, on a Friday night. Any questions or contributions, ladies and gentlemen, from the audience?
So did the bonobos have a proclivity
You're getting into this one, aren't you?
Yeah, did the bonobos have a proclivity towards self-sacrifice and to some belief?
Self what?
Self-sacrifice.
Well, I mean, by definition, the female of the species has a greater self-sacrificing role, because in order to raise the child, and if there isn't some collective raising of the children between the sexes, which in most of the animal kingdom there isn't, in apes there certainly isn't, and so the consequence of that is that the female will inevitably, the characteristics that are classically defined as female, will tend to have existed throughout long-term history as well. So the idea of altruism or of giving to the other is far greater amongst the female, because they have to raise the child. And because they had to raise the child, they weren't able to compete with the male in like hunting in the same level. They could gather, but more difficult to hunt. And therefore, but because the hunting's a difficult task. For an animal to capture another animal, it's a difficult task. It wouldn't provide the staple existence for the origin of the species. And therefore, the primary origin had to be agriculture, vegetarian existence, and so on. Had to be the primary force. And the secondary force, supplementing that and facilitating the development of the brain, facilitating the development of the body, was hunting, eating of flesh. Because we don't need to eat flesh nowadays. I mean, I still eat meat, but I remember talking to the vegetarians here, and some of you might know that modern science has overcome meat eating. We have already produced meat. I mean, I saw one video on YouTube. They got a chicken, and they picked the finest chicken in the farm, running around the farm, and then they took one feather from the finest chicken on the farm. And from that feather, they extracted the stem cells. The stem cells then were grown on structures, basically. They create some artificial structure on which you grow the stem cell of the chicken meat. The chicken meat then, from one single chicken feather, can feed the entire planet. They can produce infinite quantities of meat from this single chicken's feather, and it's the finest chicken of the farm. And so there is no problem about, the future of meat eating. People will eat meat. And I said to the vegetarians at Speaker's Corner, I said, what do you think of that? He said, I'd eat that. Because it's not killing a live animal. I said, yeah, but how many animals would die as a consequence? Because we'll no longer need the cows. And by the way, even if greenhouse gases are the cause of climate change, that's where you hit it, is cow production. Because cows, when they fart, their methane gases are one of the #1 causes, far greater than industrial pollution. #1 causes, in other words, the meat industry, and the cow industry, is #1 cause of greenhouse gases, if that is the case. I don't know, but if that is the case, as the scientists say, if that's the case, then that's the way to deal with it. The fact of the matter is, there was a guy I brought up Speaker's Corner. He was doing a PhD at King's College, and I was teaching the PhD students how to speak. And so I organised a course at Speaker's Corner in how to speak in public. And I got them all to speak about their PhD, some of you might remember. And this one guy came up here, and he was from Nigeria, and he said, I'm studying one of the most peculiar phenomena in the world, but one of the most important. And I said, what's that then? He says, I'm studying the problem we've got today, which is we can make anything. Now, I say we make anything, qualification. We can make anything except a time machine. We can make almost anything that human beings can imagine. For example, in nanotechnology, we can make, and they are investigating the ways of doing this, robots at the nanoscale, which can enter your body and clear away the development, like if you've got your arteries blocked up, clear it away. If you've got cancer, go and eat the cancer. They can cure you of your illnesses. They can grow. If you've got a broken eardrum, you can grow the eardrum on a pig or even in a machine. You can print the bloody things on 3D printers now. And so the technology is there for humanity to liberate themselves of the struggle for survival. And in actual fact, in many things, for example, modern communication technology has already laid the foundation, which Marx talked about, of superabundance. For example, if I want to go and look up something, whereas in 1982, if I wanted to find something out that nobody else knew, I would go to the British Library inside the British Museum, and there I would look through the books that Karl Marx and Darwin and Khoo were investigating through. But now if I want to do that, I pull out my mobile phone, I do a quick search on the internet, and I get the information. Now, it's true that there are some companies trying to corner the entire market of the world's information. And there are people who plunder money out of you. Like this company I've got, 3 Mobile, the worst in the world, unlimited everything, but everywhere you go it doesn't work. Or the Apple phone, the Apple mobile phone. I bought this one, you can see it's a black screen. I bought this one because I got myself a GoPro camera. The GoPro camera said to me, install it, so you install it, and then it says, you need to download Apple operating system 12 point something or other in order to operate your GoPro. So I download Apple operating system 12 point whatever, then my phone runs out of battery in 1 hour. And I go to the shop, I say, what's wrong with my phone? I downloaded it, he said, it only works for an hour now. He said, oh, you ruined it. I said, what do you mean he ruined it? He goes, that one, iPhone 6 doesn't work with 12 point whatever it is. And so I was completely morally redundant. And the reason why Apple want that, they don't want you to have a machine that works forever. They want a machine that works for a year. And then they have a new one, and you go, I want the new one. Because otherwise they don't make any money. And therefore they're dependent on making things that break. They go on about plastic. We're destroying the world because everyone's using plastic straws. And then they tell you, you've got to separate your plastic and put it in there. You've got to put your bottle in there. But actually the reality is, you go into the supermarket where they're now charging you 5 pence for a plastic bag, and every bloody object you put in the plastic bag is wrapped up in plastic. So what are they talking about? Everything is surrounded. You buy a little bloody thing from a pound shop. It's got a piece of plastic that big that when you try and open it, it cuts your hand. I mean, what are they talking about? They are manufacturing plastic goods, plastic containers, because it suits their marketing operations, their corporate sales operations to make profit. Not because it's they're serving the environment. You know, when they talk about environment, watch out, because they're probably talking shit. Because the same companies that now, you know, this years ago it used to be the oil industry destroying the world. Now you see adverts on television, save the world, sponsored by Esso. You know what I mean? That's how they do it. BP. They changed the things all green now. BP, the greenest company in the world. How many wars have been fought over oil and gas resources? How many wars will be fought over oil and gas resources? And yet they pretend, they cloak themselves in a new coat and claim that they're green. And so fundamentally, like one of my sons, the eldest son, he turned around to me and said to me, what we could do, and I was discussing with him, how we could work out how to reorganize the world economy so that people can understand that it's possible. That it's not some dream, some utopian vision, some Marxist plot, but it's a practical mechanism for changing the world. And what we discussed was this. Just the same as you have three-dimensional imagery. Like, for example, he showed me this image of a cat. And this cat, you can look at every aspect of the cat, from its organs to its internal operation, its circulation system, its bone structure. You can take that apart. You can examine this 3D model of the cat. And just the same as that, you go on Google World, for example. You can examine in 3 dimensions the structure of London. So too you can do that for the entire productive operation and consumption operation and transportation operations in the world. It can all be done. And therefore you can make the world as it is modelled, understandable. You can take it apart, put it back together as a model. And then you can work out what the future prospects are for the world, how you would reorganise the world, how you can make the world serve the needs of the people. And that fundamentally is what Karl Marx was arguing. That's what he was arguing for. Not for what this guy daubed on the Karl Marx tomb, 66 million dead, Holocaust from the Bolsheviks. Marx argued that the existing society has created the technical conditions for the liberation of humanity from the drudgery of work for the simple purpose of living. Work should be, he believed, and I believe too, work should be our creative expression. Just like you ask a kid at school, what do you want to be when you grow up? Instead of asking that question, he says, what things are you interested in? And how would you like to develop your skills in those things? And there would be no distinction between work, art, culture, performance, thinking, and work activity. No distinction. Work and leisure, the distinction will disappear, and humanity will be able to liberate itself from the millions of years of subordination to the control by nature or the control by property owners within society. On that basis, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for coming to this.
Why do you think if people were more creative, do you think society would be better? Most people like an ordinary routine.
Most people, if you look at a little baby, from the elementary stage of a baby's life, they are seeking out their environment. They begin to distinguish colours. They reach out, they grasp, they try and understand. Then they move around with enthusiasm, with energy, with joie de vivre, and with fear and panic and screaming, because they're unable to control the environment. The screaming and shouting declines as they gradually get towards their early teens. Then they begin to understand it, but they're also forced to do things that really are non-creative and are destructive to their mental state. The consequence of that is you turn people into almost like, it's not military, but it is a militarization of life. You begin to organize them in ways that are suited towards the purpose. I remember when I went to secondary school, infant school was a very playful environment. But secondary school, when I was in London, South London, in the 1970s, at secondary school, when you went to class, they started the first classes at 11 years of age, and they said, when you want to go to the toilet, put your hand up, because when you're at work later on, you won't simply be able to go to the toilet whenever you want. That's what they said. So control your physical processes. Then they used to have, in our school, they used to have corporal punishment. So they would put a slipper on the table at the beginning of the class. Anybody who caused trouble, get them up the front, whack them on the arse. Wonderful, it was wonderful. No, it's just joking. And so this corporal punishment system was ingrained as a mechanism of controlling the mind of the people and making them think, we are in this process to learn how to go to the working world. And in the working world, you would not have control of your life. Well, how true is that? You go and sign a contract with any employer on Oxford Street, whether it's a multimedia company or McDonald's hamburgers. And when you sign that contract, you give away your time to them. You don't control it, you don't decide, you don't have freedom, are not free to think, participate, make decisions yourself. only within the parameters of the crap they tell you. So if a multimedia company, you're in the marketing department. Yes, you're allowed freedom to think within the parameters of the perspective of the employer who wants you to sell, you know, a pair of knickers to a girl in Guatemala. So they want to advertise these knickers, and you have to only design the advert for the knickers to achieve the objective, rather than make something that expresses your creative endeavour. Like Leonardo da Vinci. Imagine he was employed, I mean, to some degree he was employed by the church, but otherwise, he expressed his creativity in his work. And when he wasn't working for the church, he would investigate, you know, how to make a helicopter, how to make a tank, you know, how to, you know, investigate the internal dynamics of the human being. And because of that, he was what we call Renaissance man. Every child can learn 5 languages. Every child. Every child in Britain should be learning Chinese, Spanish, German, French, English. In the upper middle classes, in the aristocracy, in the 17th century, it was the norm to speak 7 languages. It was the norm to know Shakespeare, to know Goethe in the 18th century. It was the norm to have that level of culture that allows you both to create and to appreciate the creations of other human beings. We are in a society where on the cusp of that revolution, where it's not an elite aristocracy who gets that, but the mass of the world's population should be raised out of penury, mental and physical and economic penury, and raised to the level so that everybody is an Aristotle or a Da Vinci or a Picasso, or can appreciate the work that they made and give their creativity to the world in the sphere that corresponds to their own interests, and as they vary throughout their lives. And human life will also be extended by dozens, perhaps by hundreds of years in the near future. And so we have a world to win. And those are the ideas that Marx put forward, not the lies that the attackers, the vandals, have smeared on Marx's tomb. Marx created a philosophy of worldwide human liberation. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So no one has to empty the bins anymore, is that what you're saying?
You can do robots. Robots, no problem. I mean, even
Come take over everything from your melody.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله رب العالمين. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. All praise is due to Allah on this day of Sunday. Sunday the 17th of February 2019. Alhamdulillah, I'm here today again, and it has been a while, and